Welcome to Module 4 of the TCCC-Plus course, Day 1. Finally, we get to Tourniquet application, when to apply one, hasty versus deliberate application, and confirming and recording what you have done. The tourniquet may be the single most life-saving tool in combat medicine. Used right, it saves time and lives. Used wrong, it does nothing, or it does harm. So when do we use them? Any suspected massive limb bleeding is an indication. Under fire, a tourniquet is a reflex, not a decision. A suspicion of massive bleeding should trigger a tourniquet high and tight over the uniform, and then you get to cover. If you are unsure, you still put one on, but understand the trade-off. Any correctly placed tourniquet means risking the limb, so always have a plan for how it can come off later. An arterial bleed kills now. A tourniquet only harms if it is never reassessed or converted. When in doubt, apply it. So how does a tourniquet work? It squeezes the tissue around an artery tight enough to compress the artery and to block the blood flowing through it. Blood cannot pass into the limb and it cannot return. Over time, that will cause the limb to die from lack of oxygen, but that takes at least a few hours. What matters is that they are tight enough. Here is the catch that makes loose tourniquets dangerous. Veins run at much lower pressure than arteries, so a tourniquet tight enough to block the vein, but not the artery, lets blood keep pumping into the limb with no way out. It pools, the limb swells, and the bleeding gets worse. That is the same trap that makes an improvised tourniquet without a proper windlass not a tourniquet at all, but a venous constricting band. Loose is dangerous, half tight is dangerous. You go all the way or not at all. To say it plainly, loose is worse than nothing. A band tight enough to block the vein but not the artery keeps pumping blood into the limb with no way out. The limb swells and the bleeding gets worse. All the way or not at all. There are a lot of different tourniquets on the market, and a lot of them are cheap fakes or props meant for the airsoft community. Use a proven current generation commercial tourniquet. In human testing, the CAT consistently performs best overall. Some Ukrainian tourniquets, the Sich and the Dnipro 2, had a poor reputation at first, but in current testing they perform comparably to the CAT, although neither has been assessed by the COT-CCC. The soft T wide performs significantly worse in controlled trials, with a lower rate of occlusion, and that includes the current generation. Elastic wrap-style bands are not useful and were dropped from military use. An improvised tourniquet can work, but only with a band 2 to 3 centimeters wide and a sturdy windlass, and no tourniquet occludes every time. Even a good one is only around 70 to 90% effective high on a thigh, which is why you confirm the result and add a second one right next to the first if you need to. The hasty application is for care under fire, for a high-risk spot, or for when you cannot pin down the source. This is when speed beats finesse. You need to get it on. Place it high and tight over the clothing, but try to empty the pockets first, because a wallet, a phone, or a magazine under the band will stop it working properly. Tighten the band around the limb first, then tighten the windlass or the ratchet until the bleeding stops, not just until it slows. You should see the tissue bulging above and below the band. If one is not enough, add a second side by side just above the first, and note that pain is not a reason to stop. An effective tourniquet is painful. With cover and time, we place a deliberate tourniquet about 5 to 10 centimeters above the wound, on bare skin, and never over a joint. If the tourniquet has to stay on and the limb below it dies, then at least you have saved as much of the limb as possible. And if the tourniquet does come off, a lower deliberate one releases less toxic waste product into the body than a high and tight one that was on the whole time. After application, check that the bleeding has stopped and that the pulse below the wound is gone. If one does not do it, use two side by side.
Hello, Richard here. Today I'm going to teach you how to apply the one-handed windlass tourniquet in the care under fire phase. One very important thing that you need to remember is always have your tourniquet in a place that you could easily assess it within a matter of seconds. The first step to applying the tourniquet is to remove it from your JFAC or your tourniquet pouch. Insert the injured limb through the loop of the self-adhering band. Position the tourniquet above the bleeding site, high on the extremity over the clothing or uniform. Ensure all the slack in the band is being pulled through the routing buckle before the band is fastened back on itself and the windlass is twisted. Remember, fastening the self-adhering band back on itself all the way around the limb, but not over the windlass rod clips. Twist the rod until bleeding has stopped, completing the process within 1 minute. Lock the windlass rod in place with the windlass clip. Route the self-adhering band around the rod and between the clips, and secure with the windlass strap. Remember, do not document tourniquet application time until tactical field care phase.
Here is a video of a one-handed application of a cat tourniquet on an arm in a care under fire scenario.
Hello, Richard here. I'm a 68 Whiskey combat medic. Today I'm going to teach you how to properly apply the two-handed windlass tourniquet in the tactical field care phase. The first step is you need to expose and assess the wound. Reassess any tourniquet applied in care under fire. If bleeding is not controlled, tighten the tourniquet. If bleeding is still not controlled, apply a second tourniquet side by side with the first. Remove the tourniquet from the casualty's JFAC and or carrying pouch. Slip the wounded extremity through the loop of the self-adhering band, loop or route the band around the limb, and then pass the strap tip through the slit of the buckle. Position the tourniquet about 2 to 3 inches above the wound and directly on the skin. Now pull the self-adhering band tightly. Ensure all the slack in the self-adhering band is pulled through the routing buckle before the band is fastened back on itself and the windlass is twisted. Fasten it back on itself all the way around the limb, but not over the windlass rod clips. Twist the windlass rod until bleeding has stopped, completing the process within 1 minute. Lock the windlass rod in place with the windlass clip. If bleeding is not controlled and or a distal pulse is present, continue to twist the windlass rod or apply a second tourniquet above the original tourniquet. Secure with the windlass strap. Annotate the time of tourniquet application on the windlass safety strap or the casualty's forehead, completing the process within 3 minutes. Document all treatment on the DD Form 1380 TC3 casualty card and attach it to the casualty.
Watch how the tourniquet goes on deliberately in tactical field care when you are out of immediate fire and have a little time. Both hands on the windlass, turning until the bright bleeding stops, not just until it slows. Watch the routing, the tightening, and the lock. This is the same tool you used fast under fire applied properly, high enough, tight enough, and secured so that it holds through the move. Observe in this photo that a single tourniquet does not always stop the bleed. A big thigh holds the artery deep, and a traumatic amputation can bleed from vessels that a single band cannot reach. If bright bleeding continues after the first one is tight, put a second on, side by side, just above the first, never on top of it and never over a joint. On a heavy thigh or a mangled stump, you may need 2 or even 3 side by side to shut it down. Tight enough is when the bleeding stops. Keep adding width until it does. Here we show 2 different placements, on legs and on arms, for 2 different situations. Under fire it is hasty, high and tight over the uniform with no time to aim. When you have a moment, it is deliberate, 5 to 10 centimeters above the wound, never over a joint. Both stop the bleed. The difference is how much limb you save. To confirm a tourniquet is working, note that this is only the case if both the bleeding has stopped and the distal pulse is gone. The warning signs of one that is not working include a pulse you can still feel past it, veins still full of blood, the limbs still swelling, or a wound that starts bleeding again. Once it is confirmed and you are in a tactically safe environment and out of cuff, write the time down on the tourniquet, the limb, or the forehead, and on the casualty card. That time drives every later decision about the limb, so it matters. One more point, because this war has changed the lesson. We used to say life over limb and move on because evacuation was fast. An over-applied tourniquet came off within the hour at a surgical facility, and the limb was usually fine. When evacuation stretches into hours and days, the tourniquet you correctly applied under fire can cost the limb if nobody ever reassesses it. So it is now life and limb, apply without hesitation under fire, and reassess deliberately when you have cover and time. We cover that in the conversion module under circulation and again in the prolonged field care modules. So let's look at common errors in tourniquet application. Tourniquet on but still bleeding means it's not tight enough or you need another one. If placed over a joint, it cannot occlude the artery and will keep bleeding. If hidden under clothing or a blanket and forgotten, the limb will be lost or rebleeding occur without anyone noticing. And if no time of application is recorded, this makes every later decision a guess. Also be aware that they may dislodge and should be reassessed according to our reassessment rules, which we will cover later. Now a recap. In life-threatening limb bleeds, apply tourniquet, and when in doubt, apply tourniquet. Hasty application under fire means high and tight over the clothing, pockets emptied. Deliberate in tactical field care means 5 to 10 centimeters above the wound, on bare skin, off the joint. Tighten until bleeding stops and the pulse is gone, or add a second tourniquet. Confirm placement, then record the time if out of danger. Thanks for watching our TCCC Plus for non-medics, Day 1, Module 4 on tourniquet application. Next up is Module 5, Wound Packing.